So, as an Orthodox Christian, I see the papacy and the documents of the early councils. I just have a hard time reconciling it as it's
Right.
developed, and then all the insanity we see today. How can I work through it?
Yeah. Oh, man. Great question. Um, I have to tell you, when I went through it, I jokingly said I had my Orthodox period, which didn't last very long because the Pope got in the way. When I studied the early councils, there was just no doubt. There's so many things we can look at. Pope Celestine at the Council of Ephesus, for example, and then of course the great Leo the Great at the Council of Chalcedon. And not only was Celestine, of course, acknowledged to be the supreme authority of the church at the Council of Ephesus and Leo there, but the when you read the famous letter of the Patriarch of Constantinople, let me just share this real quick. Our Orthodox friend probably knows about this, but at the council and after the council, there was a controversy because a lot of folks don't know this, but Pope Damasus never ratified Constantinople, right, in 381. And why? Because the Patriarch of Constantinople attempted to kind of leapfrog over the apostolic patriarchates, not Rome, because Rome was understood by everyone to be number one at Constantinople, but the Patriarch wanted to be number two, Deuteros. You read that at the council. The second, and Pope Damasus said, ain't gonna go there. Why? Because you have Antioch and Alexandria and Jerusalem, which are apostolic patriarchates. And I'm sorry, Constantinople isn't. And so you're not going to leapfrog over those. And so Damasus never ratified the symbol, the creed from Constantinople or the council itself. And everybody knew that, east and west. But at Chalcedon, with the Christological controversies, and of course, Leo the Great declares the truth in the famous tome of Leo, which I recommend folks to read. It's just a beautiful document. It's not that long, but it's absolutely rich, where he declares the truth on the nature of Christ, and the Council Fathers erupt and say, Peter has spoken through Leo. The matter is at an end. Well, the Patriarch of Constantinople writes a letter to Leo, and when you read it, it's quite beautiful. He says, I speak as a son to a father. And he's basically begging the Holy Father to ratify not only Chalcedon, but also Constantinople and the symbol of Constantinople, which just, when I first saw that 30 plus years ago, it was like, oh my gosh, the whole world understood. You don't have an ecumenical council. You don't even have the symbol of faith as it was defined there at Constantinople, apart from the Pope. And so when I saw that, oh my gosh. Now, to my Orthodox friend here, to answer your question, we have to understand that when the Pope speaks definitively, and in the case of ratifying a council, that's an infallible act. People forget that. There's no infallible teaching in the church apart from the Pope. A lot of people, well, he has only spoken infallibly twice. Oh my goodness, that's crazy. No, every single infallible teaching of the church has as its foundation a pope, the exercise of the Petrine ministry, whether it's ratifying a council, or even in the case of universal and ordinary teachings of the magisterium that are infallible, you have to have the Pope. Otherwise, there's no infallible teaching. But that doesn't mean, and this is one that we have to understand, folks, that everything the Pope says is infallible, right? You do not have to agree with everything the Pope says at 35,000 feet on an airplane, right? Now, we could get into some of the minutiae and talk about, I think some of the stuff going on today is crazy, attacking Pope Francis in ways that it's blowing my mind, because I don't have a single problem with any magisterial teaching of Pope Francis. I actually love the magisterial teachings of Pope Francis, and I think he has a lot of incredibly good things to say. And we have to be careful because we need to understand that we have to give religious assent even to non-infallible teachings of the magisterium, not just the divine and Catholic faith that we have to give to the infallible ones. But I think the answer to your question, I think to a great extent is, I think I'll put it this way: in some ways, we're the victims of what I call the curse of Pope Saint John Paul the Great, right? Because he was such an extraordinary pope. He wrote on everything, and he was so incredibly erudite. And not that people didn't criticize him either. As I recall, the Assisi prayer gathering and kissing the Quran and all of that, which I think people went a little overboard on some of that too. But the point is, this man was so extraordinary, one of the great popes. I'm definitely top 10 in the history of the church, that I think people have come to expect every pope is going to be John Paul the Great. Brother, that ain't going to happen, right? You're not going to have every pope being even Benedict, the brilliance of Benedict, the incredible holiness and brilliance of John Paul. So when Francis, says some things on airplanes where he's not exactly clear, and folks, we need to lighten up and understand. You listen respectfully, right? And respectfully is important, but make the distinctions. As my philosophy professor, Dr. Lowry at St. Charles Borromeo used to say, distinctions, distinctions, distinctions. You have to make a distinction between the definitive teachings that we must give, what Vatican I defined as divine and Catholic faith. That means if you reject that, you're going to hell, right? On the objective level, right? You're committing a sin that is, on the objective level, grave matter. Now, of course, there's always the judgment is left to God, but the point is, you'll lose your soul if you knowingly reject the definitive teaching of the church. Opposed to, look, if you struggle with the Pope's emphasis on, let's just say, climate change, for example, that is not a definitive teaching of the church. That's not even matter that could be definitive teaching of the church. It's a matter of science. And so people can respectfully disagree with the Holy Father on a matter like that, but make the distinctions, my friend.